Okay, so what I call this, y'all, is the good, the bad, and the ugly of European colonization, or Concept 2.1. All right, now, generalizations. Now, I include this, y'all, because this is some similarities. If y'all are going to be like struggling to try to come up with similarities, as I did, between how the Europeans do things, this is maybe something that will help you. Regardless of the European colonizer, they all generally felt, and this is really not here, y'all. You might want to write this like down here on the bottom or up on the top, or maybe even over here, relationship with natives or something. But this is a generalization. It applies to the French, the Dutch, the Spanish, even the Russians, the English. All of them saw Native Americans as uncivilized, as not quite equal human beings. Now, it doesn't mean they all treated them equally the same. Some were nicer, some weren't, but none of them saw them as equals. That's something you could talk about. And that had a lot to do with, their various ideas of race, but also their religion and that kind of thing. Now, your AP curriculum talks about misunderstandings between natives and European colonizers. I don't know about y'all, but calling it a misunderstanding to me is really not adequate. Misunderstanding is like, when my wife says, I thought you were picking up the dog. Like, no, that was you were going to pick up the dog. Misunderstanding does not convey sufficiently, destroying a village or something, okay? Now, so what are the reasons? Well, regardless of colonizer, they didn't get how Indians viewed ownership of land. Indians didn't really understand how Europeans viewed ownership of land. Remember that quote? Might as well own the sky, the air, very, very different view. To Indians, using something was ownership. Having a piece of paper, giving somebody some money, that just wasn't going to work. Remember, too, Indians viewed family and especially gender roles very, very differently. What do I mean by that? Well, if you guys remember when we talked about Native Americans very carefully divided men's task from women's task. Men hunted, fished, they fought battles when necessary. What they didn't do was farm. Women farmed. They planted, they harvested, and they educated the young. That was their job. You didn't do each other's job, okay? Whereas English men, Spanish men might work in the fields alongside the wives. That was curious for the Indians. And it would be one thing that would make it really hard for us to understand, why Indians just couldn't live on these farms and do, quote, work for, agricultural type things. Religion is also going to be a key problem. Whether you're French and Catholic, Spanish and Catholic, English and Protestant, Indian religion was very, very peculiar to you. And very few truly understood it. Maybe some of the French priests had some of the most luck. The Spanish eventually got a somewhat more complex view of it. But that's going to lead to some not just misunderstandings, but some serious violence. So here's a couple similarities if you guys got to have one. Because if you guys remember on SAQs, there's 3 parts. And sometimes they'll do something like this. Name one similarity for part A. Name one difference for part B. Okay? And that kind of thing. So there you go. Now, what I do on the Spanish today, y'all, really is technically a lot of it is from Unit 1 or Period 1. But I separate it and include it in Period 2. Now, comparing the differences between the European colonization methods, y'all, and how they resulted, that is really, really important to know. Now, a very key thing that you guys should know as well, too, is if they asked you about differences and similarities, like let's say it's an essay, you better make sure you talk about both. You could write the best essay in the world about differences, but if you don't mention the similarities, you're probably not going to get full credit or any credit. You've got to do both. Now, on the AP test, y'all, especially US, but also for world, there is this thing called the complexity point, right? Anybody know the nickname of the complexity point? Unicorn point. Why? Yeah, hardly anybody ever sees it, right? And nobody knows it. I mean, unless you have like one in your bedroom, like a little unicorn. No one ever sees a unicorn. No one ever sees complexity. So a few years ago, at some workshop, a really successful AP US history teacher mentioned that one thing you could do that might get you the point is if you don't only mention the differences and similarities, but you give the reasons for those differences. Okay. And I'm going to try to do that with y'all and explain why the French or why the British or why the Spanish treated Indians differently, why they had different goals. And I think a reader, when reading that, see not only telling the differences, but explaining the differences, they're to go, ooh, okay, yeah, this young man, this young woman, they know what the heck they're doing. Okay. So, plus, it's deeper critical thinking. Okay, I see these reasons. Why? Why are they I mean, I see these things that are different. Why are they different? Or why are they similar? Okay. And then finally, you're going to look at the impact that each power had, because they do. They impact North America differently, and they will impact Indians, the natives, differently. We use a lot of different terms for Native Americans, Indians, indigenous people. I even remember seeing Amerindians. In Canada, they call them First Nations. There's different terms, but essentially, they are the native populations. Maybe that's the easiest way to remember them. Okay, now the first group we're going to talk about, and notice here on this chart, y'all, that I gave you guys here, I have the key concept. I have the themes, okay? And then I have the little flag. And of course, what do you think what are people from Spain called, y'all? Spanish or Spaniards, right? Now you go, well, duh, Mr. D. But when we get to the Netherlands, what are the people of the Netherlands called? Dutch. Very good. See, y'all are smart. Other people are like, Netherlanders. I'm like, well, that might work if you're German. But anyway. All right. So the first one here, y'all, if you read underneath Spain, New Spain, because that's what they called their region, is New Spain. And if you go further south, it might have been called New Colombia. I can't remember. But the Spanish, y'all, they are literally going to be stripping the land of its wealth. Now, the English are going to be a little bit more foresighted. The English are going to use the land too, but they're going to plant stuff and grow it and harvest it and plant and grow and harvest. They're going to fish the seas. They're going to find some way to make their wealth, and it's going to last a lot longer. Once you take the gold and silver, y'all, out of the ground, it's gone, right? By the way, where is a lot of that gold, silver, and precious jewels today that was stripped from Mexico and other places? Where? On the bottom of the oceans, right? A lot of Spanish ships were sunk, y'all. England stopped a lot of the ships. The French stopped a lot of the ships. But just the amount of gold and silver that did get through, y'all, completely overinflated the Spanish economy and led to, you guys think inflation is bad now? Imagine if prices were going up daily, okay? Because when all this gold and silver arrived in Spain, y'all, the value of gold and silver plunged. Why? Yeah, there was a lot of it, right? That's the whole thing. Gold and silver is rare. If it stops being as rare, it's not as valuable to you and me. You're going to ask for more of it to get something. Like, yeah, man, I used to ask for one piece of gold for that. But, one piece of gold ain't worth much anymore. I need 2 pieces of gold. Tomorrow, maybe 3. Okay. And so it's sad, but what gold did get there. And what's interesting is the amount still on the ocean. There's not more than a year or two, y'all, that goes by that somebody doesn't somewhere find a Spanish vessel, underwater that sunk. And the value, y'all, I mean, it isn't like, oh, it's worth $1 million. Sometimes it's not even, oh, it's worth 10 million. Sometimes it's in the hundreds of millions. There was one or several ships found off of Colombia. I think they rated it in the billions. That's billions with a B, right? It's incredible. Now, when you look at this flag, which I printed on your paper, you see the old Spanish flag. But this was an important event. We all know Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, but that year wasn't an accident, y'all. In 1492, if you remember, the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon came together. Obviously, that's Castile, so that the rampant lion must be Aragon. And they made it literal, y'all. King Isabella, no, sorry, that'd be weird. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, right? They literally got married. They brought their kingdoms together in more ways than one. But anyway, and that brings Spain together. The last of the Spanish Muslims is driven out of Spain. Granada surrenders in 1492, and now Spain is a united, powerful nation state. So when Christopher Columbus comes around and asks for some money to go on a voyage, guess what? They're ready to do it. A few years before, they wouldn't have been. So, of course, if I'm going to talk about Spain, I have to hear one of my favorite instruments, the Spanish guitar. All right, there you go. I feel much better just hearing that. Don't worry about this. I'm going to try to put this up as a PowerPoint if I can remember. You guys know most of this. I've talked about it. You've read about it ad nauseum. You guys know when the Spanish come over here, yep, there's a lot of deadly disease. Smallpox being the biggie. You guys know about the Columbian Exchange, right? Okay. Hopefully you watched that video that I talked about in Encomienda, where essentially in return for Indians getting Christianity and instruction in the Spanish language and maybe protection, they gave up their labor. They gave up that most precious of resources, time, right? And the Europeans, all of them, in some way or another, y'all, did use West African slaves. This is another common thing to different extents, right? And they switched to West African slavery when the Native Americans either, started having children of mixed background that couldn't work under Spanish law, or sadly, the Indians died or just refused to do it, okay? That happened in some cases. A key difference between the Spanish and, say, the French and English, y'all, is the Spanish also resorted to great deal of mining for gold, but particularly silver. And the other thing is the caste system. Every one of these groups is going to have some kind of social system. Sadly, we have these kind of social systems, and you can argue we still do today. But today, y'all, it's a lot more free. If I were to ask you guys, who has a better chance to become a billionaire in this country? You guys or Bill Gates' son? What would you say? Come on, it's not hard. Bill Gates' son, right? Why? His dad's a billionaire. He could go to the best schools. I mean, heck, his allowance is probably $1 million, right? Here's your allowance for the week, kid. $1 million. I don't know. But the thing is, that doesn't mean y'all can't become millionaires or billionaires. And if you do, of course, you remember Mr. D's name. And you look him up like, Mr. D, just want to thank you with a nice couple million here. But anyway, y'all, in our world today, and it may not be as much as you and I want, you have what's called social mobility. You can move up and down. Yes, I understand some people may have more advantages, maybe because of the color of their skin or where they were born or whatever. But you can still move up and down. Sorry, in the Spanish, You're born in Spain, you're at the top. Ain't nobody going to take that away from you. Mom and dad have you, but have you over in New Spain? Not quite as good. You're an Indian woman? Man, you're never going to be able to go much higher. Now, if you hook up with the Spanish guy, have a kid, maybe you'll move up a little bit, right? If you're an African, sorry, you might be with the, if you're a free African, maybe you might be a little bit up there above the Indians. But if you're an enslaved African, sorry, you're beneath the Native Americans who before had been at the bottom. And there's not a lot you can do about it. That's one of the things, y'all, that'll be very different about the English. And that will be ultimately the thing that attracted people then and still to this day attracts people to America that want a chance to go as far as their talents and ability will take them, and not to just, be stuck because of the color of your skin or where you were born or something like that. Okay, very, very key difference. Yepper. Oh, encomienda, I'll talk about that in there, but that would go more with the Indians, but it is part of the economic system because they made Indians work for them, right? They mined, they got gold from, so and that's the beauty of categories. The question asked was, is encomienda economic or social or what? You can literally put it into multiple categories because there are social aspects, right? Making them into workers and converting them and that, but it also has economic results as well too. You could also put it where you discuss Native Americans. You could mention it in several places. So don't ever feel that, ooh, there's only one place for this. Okay. All right. Now, this is in your writing, so don't copy all this, but we see that word subjugating again. The Spanish, y'all, they extracted wealth from the land, gold and silver and precious jewels. How did they do it? They subjugated native populations through the encomienda system. Now, you and I may not like how they went about spreading Christianity. As a person, as a Christian, I'm not really comfortable how they forced people to do it. But the result was that the people did become Christian. Not saying that makes it right by any means, but it did ultimately work. To this day, most of the time, when you guys meet a person of Hispanic background, what do you almost always assume their religion's going to be? They're going to be Catholic. If they're not, you're kind of surprised, like, oh, okay, that's cool. If it even comes up, right? Spanish were successful, but at a very, very high cost. But this is something also very different. Once the Indians did convert, once they went through the encomiendas, and if they were lucky and lived, the Spanish had a place for them in their social hierarchy. They were up above the enslaved people. Now, you and I might say, oh, great, they're at the bottom of the heap. Boy, isn't that wonderful. But the English, y'all, they didn't even have a place for the Indians. They weren't even on the pyramid. They just pushed them away. So the Spanish, yeah, they were bad, but ultimately they did incorporate, they did include these people into this new world that they built. Whereas the English, for the most part, y'all, pushed them away or just killed them. All right. So key difference there. We'll talk about some of the reasons for it. Now, I give you guys a map. And it isn't just because Mr. D taught geography for like almost 10 years and I still have a lot of geography type in me. It is really important because, as I said, y'all, learning why things happened is as important as learning what the differences were or why these differences occurred. If you look at where the Spanish empire was, y'all, it was up here. Okay. Oh, they called it New Granada. I was calling it New Colombia, but they called it, I think, New Granada down there, maybe. I got it cut off, so I can't really tell. But New Spain, New Mexico, this incorporates Middle and Southern California, Alta California, some people would call it, as well as Lower California or Baja California. It incorporates modern day New Mexico, Arizona. But look at Texas, y'all. Not much, contrary to what you think, at least in the early days in Texas. There wasn't a lot, y'all, that Texas offered. They offered gold and silver and stuff out here. This dry land, y'all, had lots of gold and silver in the mountains. Sorry, we didn't really have it in Texas. They did have the Gulf Coast. They had Florida, y'all, but I hate to say it, Florida was nothing. They didn't even really want Florida, right? You and I today think of Florida as this awesome place, like, man, we're going to go to Disney World and we're going to go to, what is that? What are all the things that Universal Studios and all that cool stuff they have in Florida? Until really the 1900s, y'all, Florida was nothing but a big swamp. I mean, they fought forever to try to get anything. There was hardly any people living there, y'all. And the Spanish kind of felt the same way. and they're really going to have to be almost kind of forced to do something with Florida. And if you look here, y'all, they controlled obviously Central America or Mesoamerica. They controlled a lot of South America, everything that pretty much isn't Brazil, they controlled. They controlled a lot of the Caribbean islands, even those Caribbean islands today that speak French or English. At one time, most of them were also under Spanish control. Okay. Now, so why is this important? Well, like I said, y'all, very dry up here, but lots of jewels, lots of gold, lots of silver. Now, when the English come and settle over here, y'all, bless their hearts, they tried the same thing. Like, oh man, there's gonna be lots of gold and silver. Sorry, nope, there isn't. But there is something also valuable: really fertile soil, lots of trees that can be cut down and sold, lots of beaver and wild animals whose skins can be used. And of course, up here, lots and lots of fish, right, that you can use. So, maybe not gold or silver, but definitely worth a lot. So that's an important thing. All right. Oh, just a sec. Now, the economic goals. The main goals of the Spanish, y'all, were to make money for the mother country. Now, that's not really that unusual. The French wanted some. The English definitely wanted money for their joint stock companies. But the Spanish, y'all, they needed the gold and silver. They needed it for what they hoped would be their wars against, like, England, to make England into a Catholic country again. So they wanted to make dinero. Dinero is Spanish for dinner, of course. They wanted this. Y mucho dinero. They wanted mucho dinero, much money, right? Now, how did they go about doing this? Well, they were among the most ardent mercantilists. Mercantilists, y'all remember, require that you keep the gold and silver in your country. Don't trade with other countries unless you really have to. So if you wanted to trade with New Spain or New Granada, you had to use a handful of Spanish ports. And this really limited their development, y'all. They kind of were behind from the beginning. Now, the British were pretty strict too, at least in principle, but they didn't enforce it. And as a result, all kinds of trade came into America, the British America, compared to the Spanish. You guys know about encomiendas. Here I have it listed under economics. But like I said, you could include it under social. You could include it under relationship with Indians. They built the missions, like the mission San Antonio de Valero, the Alamo, Presidios, Fortalezas. My Spanish is awful, y'all. I'm by ignorant. They had, of course, a tremendous success in gold and silver. As I was mentioning, y'all, hardly a decade at the most goes by that some Spanish discovery isn't made. I mean, some discovery isn't made of a Spanish ship with gold and silver and emeralds and you name it on it. And, of course, that stuff stays forever under the ocean, right? It doesn't go bad. So they find that. And the thing I always think of, y'all, is if we found this much on the bottom of the ocean, think how much must have gotten across the ocean. What they stripped, y'all, from New Spain, modern-day Mexico, from South America, it's just unbelievable. And, in fact, I think this recent thing, the Spanish tried to claim it because it was Spanish ships, but the Colombians are like, hey, dude, you stripped that out of our country 400 years ago. That is ours. And when it's billions of dollars, it's a serious deal. Now, as I said, I don't like how the Spanish converted the Indians. I think you should have a choice in your faith like that. Otherwise, is it real if it's fake, if it's forced? But it was ultimately successful. It did make the Indians into converts. Now, why was this such a big deal? Because remember, y'all, was it 1512, 1517, whatever, Martin Luther begins the Protestant Reformation. John Calvin does the same thing in France and in Switzerland. Henry VIII does it in England. If I'm a Catholic, I am really nervous about this new Protestant faith. It's in fact, It's something that we today, and I think this word is way overused, y'all, but it's sort of the cool buzzword that a lot of people use now. It's called existential. In other words, it is a threat to our existence. I mean, you'll have people say that all the time. Man, if I don't go to the movie this weekend, it's an existential threat to my existence. But the thing is, they, to the Catholic, y'all, they were seriously worried about this. They needed the gold. They needed the silver to be able to fight back Protestant armies. The Spanish, y'all, have this goal ultimately called the Spanish Armada, to invade England and make England Catholic again, as it had been under the current monarch, Elizabeth's half-sister Mary, right? And under the early days of Henry VIII. And so they want to do that. And also, y'all, you've got to remember, these people, a lot more than we today, believe that they had to save these people's souls. If it meant misery, even torture, maybe even death, to get them to convert, it was worth it, because it was saving their immortal soul, right? When they were put into the soil. But the thing is, so that's one big reason. And I think the English felt that to an extent. But they didn't feel as threatened by Catholicism as the French felt threatened by Protestantism, as the Spanish felt threatened by Protestantism. Now, I want to tell this story here because it's kind of one of my favorites, but it also kind of explains how the Spanish operated. I don't know if you guys have ever heard the term or the phrase, better to be proactive than reactive. What does that mean? What does like proactive mean? Be active before, right? Don't wait for something bad to happen. Stop it from happening at all, right? Rather than wait to get sick, maybe be healthy or take steps so you don't get sick in the first place. Now, the Spanish, y'all, as I told you, they didn't really give a hoot about Florida. They didn't really care much more about our beloved Texas, to be honest, until the French came along. And then, y'all, the Spanish kind of remind me of like a little kid. I don't know if you guys have little brothers and sisters, and I didn't have little brothers and sisters. My brother and sister were much, much older than when I was born. I was what you call an accident. I mean, I was a real surprise when I was born. But anyway, y'all, I had a niece that was much younger, right? But not a whole lot younger. And I can remember, she'd have some toy, never play with it. And then, if I wanted that toy, suddenly what? You can't have that. That's mine. Well, you never picked it up. You don't play with it. You don't use it anymore. But it's mine. I'm going to tell mom, which is my sister, and that kind of thing. And I'm like, geez. Well, the French and Spanish were kind of like that. The Spanish had Florida. They weren't doing jack with it until the French came and built a little fort that you see right here, Fort Caroline. Now, this fort had a very, very evil purpose in the minds of the Spanish. It could be used, and probably was used briefly, to attack Spanish ships carrying all that gold and silver that the French didn't have in any of their colonies. So it was a real threat. So what happens? Well, the leader of this fort down here, Fort San Mateo, okay, shown over right here, the Spanish fort sends its men by land. They march up to the French fort of Fort Caroline. What they don't know, y'all, is at the same time, the French have sent their men in ships to come and attack Fort San Mateo, the Spanish fort. So while Spanish men are marching up along in the coast through the swamps, the French are coming down by boat. Now, when you think of summer and you think of Florida, what kind of weather event comes to mind, y'all? What do they have in Florida every summer? At least one? Hurricanes, right? I mean, it's like a hurricane magnet, Florida, right? And so here comes a hurricane. We don't know for sure, but it was a bad storm. All right. The French fleet, y'all, is washed up onto a sandbar. A lot of them drowned. Ships crushed. Okay. In the meantime, the Spanish guys don't know that. They make their way through the storm, and they appear here at Fort Caroline. Now, they come out of the woods, And to their surprise, I mean, it's raining like, you know what, there are no French guards. They're able to just walk into the fort. A lot of the French, y'all, are actually asleep in bed, and they kill them right in their beds, okay? The French that survive, they get out, they come running down, and they get in the one or two boats that are left, and they leave, man. They sail away. In the meantime, you know, the Spanish destroy the fort, whatever they need to do, and then they start making their way slowly back up, down the coast, back down to their fort. When suddenly they come to this sandbar. Now, when they get to the sandbar, here are all these Frenchmen. Now, there's part of the story I've not told yet, and that is these Frenchmen, unlike most Frenchmen, y'all, they're not Catholic. These are Huguenots. Now, Huguenots are French Protestants. It was a minority of Frenchmen who were following the teachings of John Calvin. They were Protestant, okay? They were called Huguenots. And in one of the handful of times the French did this, they had sent Huguenots here. So it's Huguenots, y'all, that are resting, looking like you know what, on the beach there. So here comes Menendez, and they're tired, these Spanish men, but they see these Frenchmen. And so Menendez comes up, and he says to the Frenchman, he says, "How many of you here are of the one and true Catholic faith?" And the captain of the French is like, "We are all Protestants. We are all Huguenots, following the teachings of John Calvin." And so Menendez kind of looks around that guy, and he says, "Once again, how many of you here are of the one and true Catholic faith?" And you start seeing some hands come up like, "Yeah, I am. I could be. I used to be. Will it help?" And so, I don't know, half or so of them come over, and their lives are spared. But those that refused to go back to Catholicism, they take them to the bay. And there at the bay, they kneel the men down, and one by one, they slice their throats. Their blood pours into the bay. And to this day, that bay where the Huguenots died is called La Bahia de Matanzas, which is my bad Spanish for like basically the Bay of Massacre, right? French don't come back to Florida, y'all. They're done. That's what I mean. The Spanish kind of had to be made to do something. But when they did, they took care of it. All right. I just love that story. Now, social development, family and all that. The main difference between English and Spanish, and something that the Spanish share with the French, is that the Spanish and French both, y'all, did not bring families over. They almost brought very few women over, okay? Whereas the English, y'all, they're going to come over by the boatload. With the exception of Jamestown, y'all, the English come over with men, women, and children. Whole different dynamic. The French and Spanish, it's the dudes that come over. Very few dudettes, okay? Now, what does this mean? Well, guess what? I hate to say it about my own sex, but when there aren't ladies around, well, at least Spanish ladies, they start looking in other places for ladies. And of course, that was Indian women, okay? Now, I hate to say it too, the Spanish didn't always rely on consensual relationships, i.e., rape in some cases. But also think about it, even if it wasn't, this wasn't necessarily a real choice that a lot of these Indian women might have had. Now, in that one video I made, y'all, I talked a lot about this picture. The people look happy there. And maybe she's happy because she's like, ooh, by marrying the Spanish guy, I just moved up one step in the old social hierarchy. And my baby's going to be even higher than me, okay? But think of the power that man would have over her, And this is something different about our cultures today. You and I hope, when you guys marry, you're going to marry for love, right? I hope that's what you do. And that's great. There was that kind of thing, but there wasn't really this notion of, oh, this is my one soulmate. Somehow on this planet, I have found the one woman, the one man that was made for me. No, they didn't have that kind of romantic belief that you and I might have. It was like, hey, this is going to make a great economic relationship. We got some stuff in common. We can have some kids. Life's going to be all right. I mean, and I hope love developed, and I hope these people loved each other. But remember, it's a little bit different than ours. Now, the child that she has represents what today is Mexico. People that today are Mexicans or whatever, like, if you talk about Guatemala, El Salvador, by that I mean Hispanic people all the way down into South America, they're either closer to this guy, being Spanish background, light skinned in this case, or being an Indian woman, darker skinned. They're somewhere here. All right. And like I said, that's the result, the mestizo. Okay. And they had a word for it. And if you have a word for it, means you got to have a lot of them. And indeed, y'all, in that Spanish hierarchy, this is where most of the people of New Spain eventually became. The men, because there were very few women, ended up with Indian women having children that were in the middle. The Indian women, like I said, with men, had those. The only time that the Indians then found themselves not at the bottom, sadly, was when people of African descent were brought over either from the Caribbean or Africa and made to do slave labor. Political development. Now, Spain, y'all, unlike the English colonies, and we'll talk about the reasons for that next week, Spain kept a really, really tight control over New Spain, over New Granada. Madrid, of course, was and is the capital of Spain back then. And really, they made sure that all big decisions came from there. And this could be difficult, y'all, because let's say you want to build some government building, okay? Well, you just can't do it. You got to ask Madrid, okay? So what does that mean? Well, it means we need to write it all up. We're going to put it on a ship. We're going to take it across the Atlantic Ocean. It's going to take about 6 to 8 weeks, if it even gets there. And then they're going to look at it, debate it, decide if they're going to do it, give it an okay or no. Then they send the ship back with the message. And really 3 or 4 months after you asked it, you may not even need to build it now, you'd get the answer. So what Spain ended up doing was having a person called a viceroy. This is a guy by the name of Mendoza. Now, a viceroy, y'all, was not picked by the people. People had no power over this guy. This was a king appointment. The king could hire him. The king could fire him. Unlike the English, who let the colonists in some cases pick their governor, okay, or control the salary of their governor, they didn't have that. You don't see like the little colonial assemblies like we had in the colonies for reasons, like I said, I'll talk about later. And there is a consequence even to this day in a lot of countries, y'all, that had this kind of tight rule from abroad and didn't let the people in those countries have any say about how to do things. Now, in the 1960s, Africa gets its independence. In the 1820s, 1830s, South America gets their independence. Well, what's the story? Well, in a lot of cases, y'all, it's a very sad story. It's not democracy like we had in this country. You might have a few years of it, and then you'd have some dictator like a Santa Anna in Mexico come to power, or various dictators over there. A lot of historians believe had more countries acted as the English did, I'm not saying by any means they were perfect, but they did at least let some of the locals participate. They got some training, so when independence comes, they know how to deal with it. You know, some people may reject that, but it is a consequence. It's one reason Latin America has had a history until relatively recently, y'all, of like one military dictatorship after another, or Africa, where sometimes it might seem like it's dictator of the week, you know, down there sometimes. The Spanish have very little respect for their religion, at least initially. And once again, this is something good that you could talk about if you want to show and demonstrate some complexity. Remember, the Aztec temples such as this, El Templo Mayor, were literally leveled, and the stones from it were used to build Christian churches. I mean, we literally level everything that they have, and we build stuff on top of it, okay? That shows a lot of contempt, obviously, for their beliefs. And, of course, there you see the great city of Tenochtitlan, which becomes Mexico City. More so than others, though, there were unique Spanish leaders who were incredibly cruel. I mean, yes, most of them Indians that died of disease, but people like De Soto, who quote discovered the Mississippi, and Coronado, who quote discovered the Grand Canyon, and Oñate could be incredibly cruel. Oñate is most notorious for what happens at Acoma, which was a flat city it's a city flat on a flat hill, a mesa, so to speak. And after defeating the Acomans in battle, the surviving men, I think they were 25 years and over, Oñate has them line up. And one by one, y'all, they cut off their foot. Okay, incredible kind of cruelty like that. Even the Spanish said Oñate. I mean, when a conquistador says, dude, you're being cruel, dude, you're being cruel. Okay. Now, they use the encomienda system, right? We've talked about that ad nauseums, to mine gold, to mine silver. Remember, the Indians got religion, Catholic religion. They got their souls saved in return for basically working as virtual slaves. There you go. Man, that's pretty awful looking. But anyway, you see them literally being burned there. Maybe that's what would happen to them if they didn't get Christianized. They thought, and there you see an encomienda building where the Indians were living. Now, often pointed out is, well, at least the Spanish married the Indian women. But remember, I gave you reasons for that. The Spanish and the French did not bring along families. They didn't even bring along just women very much. And the result was, well, the men were men, and they married the Indian women, and of course they had children, the mestizos that we talked about here, right? Now, in 1680, an Indian chief by the name of Pope in what is today New Mexico leads a rebellion. You guys will see this mentioned in your curriculum, sometimes specifically as Pope, sometimes as the Pueblo Rebellion because it was Pueblo Indians. And so what happens is, Pope leads this rebellion, and he sent basically this knotted rope to all these different Pueblo tribes, and they were instructed to remove a knot each day. And when the knots were done, they were to attack. And this way, y'all, all Indians would attack simultaneously. The Spanish couldn't go and put down one rebellion in one Pueblo and then send their troops to put down another. They were being attacked on all fronts at one time. And as a result, they drove the Spanish away, y'all, for about 30 years. Indians began to practice their faith again. They opened up the kivas, these religious centers that they had. And the Spanish, y'all, reluctantly began to start accepting some Indian beliefs or incorporating them. And this is where you get the story of the man you see up there on top. His name was Juan Diego. And Juan Diego, y'all, was a young Christian Indian convert. And one day, near Mexico City, in the place called Guadalupe, he runs into, he's walking and he says the Virgin Mary appeared to him. Now, whether you and I believe that story, it doesn't really matter. He believed it, and a lot of people believe that story today. So it's important to understand and honor their beliefs. Now, he sees this image of he sees the Virgin Mary, this apparition, and of course he knows that no one is going to believe a young Indian boy. And so, as proof, the Virgin Mary makes the roses growing there bloom in this cold December. And he gathers these to take to the church as sort of proof that indeed he did see the Virgin Mary. And he puts them like in his poncho there, right? So when he makes his way in to Mexico City into the church, he tells them the story. And of course, they don't believe him. Why would the Virgin Mary appear to an Indian boy after all? But then this is the image that is left there. And if you guys are very familiar at all with Hispanic culture in this area, you guys have seen this. It's in Mexican homes lots of times. It may even be on cars. And this is the image. Now, I got to tell you, and I'm not meaning any disrespect to some of these people that I hear, but you will hear people say like, this lady found an image of Jesus on toast or on a tortilla. And, I'm like, okay, I guess, that's kind of weird, but whatever. And so when I went to Mexico City in 1989 to see Mexico City, but also to go out to see this, I really had no idea. There wasn't an internet, y'all, so I could check to see what I was going to see. So I expected to see some vague image. Now, as I neared the church where this poncho is preserved, I was incredibly moved, y'all, because on their knees, I saw dozens and dozens of very faithful people literally crawling on their knees into this church. Now, the church, y'all, has been built to accommodate this poncho. It's got a gold frame around it. It's high up on the wall. And there's actually an escalator that goes underneath the altar. So we made our way into the church. They were having a service, and we walked around the edges. It's sort of a round church. And then we took the escalator down and underneath this thing. And I tell you, dudes, I got chills. I mean, I'm Protestant, but I couldn't believe this. This was very, very moving. It's one of the times I've really, really felt something. And like I said, that's my own religious beliefs, and don't mean to push them on you, but I did feel something, and I was very impressed. So why do I tell that whole story? I tell it, y'all, because this would have never happened without Pope's rebellion. That they would include and make a saint out of an Indian boy, a young Indian kid, right? And they began to give them a bigger role and to accommodate them. So once again, if you're talking about Indians and Native Americans, mention that. Mention the evolution, how that began to change. Other students aren't going to do that. Now, you guys have heard about De las Casas. This is another thing that you could mention to show some complexity with the Indians and the Native Americans. They actually had debates in the town of Valladolid. De las Casas and Sepulveda debated. De las Casas, of course, believed that Native Americans were God's children. They should be treated better and given better rights. But sadly, y'all, he did advocate that Indians be replaced with Africans. All right. Now, so the Spanish did have slavery. You can add this to the bottom down there. They bring over African slaves. And like I said, De las Casas sadly did encourage this at first. And of course, this gives that last and bottom layer to the Spanish caste system. Here's just some trivia, and you guys can write this down somewhere on the bottom. The oldest city in technically the 50 United States is St. Augustine. It was founded, y'all, just after the Spanish destroyed Fort Caroline that I just talked about. The city of Santa Fe was established about the same time as Jamestown was. And that's important because, so often, y'all, American history is taught like, oh, the English started over here and nothing was happening over on this other side. But we know simultaneously, y'all, the French, the Spanish were doing their own thing in areas that became the United States. So kind of keep that in mind. And I'm glad to say that more modern textbooks do include that. Now, the legacy, obviously, the Spanish language is one of the most spoken, if not, I think it probably is the most spoken language in this hemisphere, right? Catholicism, when you meet a person that's Hispanic, usually the assumption is what? They're Catholic. And you can think, whether you like how they did it, the Spanish, priest and conquistador. Spanish architecture is shown up here. The terms that you and I think is quintessentially American, like the cowboy, goes back to actually the Spanish vaquero. Terms like lariat. I don't know if you guys have ever seen a lariat, but I found a picture of a lariat for you guys to use. Oh, no, there's a vaquero. There's a lariat. Yeah, okay. Oh, no, that's the girls at Kobe. That's our drill team. Okay, yeah, there we go. There's a lariat. Okay, wow. And rodeos, right? A lot of place names. It's, of course, Aaron Copland, Mr. D's opinion, the greatest American composer ever. That's rodeo. And of course, you guys know, what's the best food in the world? And there's only one correct answer. It is, of course, Mexican food. All right. Now, England. Now, English colonization. Now, you see this lovely lady in the corner here. Her name is Kate Bush. And if you guys watch Stranger Things, they recently played some Kate Bush in there, and her music has gone back to the top of the chart. Mr. D knew her when she wasn't cool. Yeah, Mr. D had a crush on her then and have a crush on her today. Here she is singing Old England, My Lion Heart.
Oh, England, my lion heart, dropped from my black spitfire to mark you no much. Give me one kiss in apple blossom.
I don't know why she turned down my frequent marriage proposals, just because they were mailed to her, But anyway, so key concepts here. You can read all this. This is right off your packet there. The English, y'all, the key difference, they sent over men and women. Jamestown is an exception, okay? That's going to be the reason that they don't fraternize with the Indian women nearly as much. Also, too, y'all, the people come over here, not just of English background, but Scottish, Welsh, Irish. They didn't care. They just wanted people to settle it. Also, the people come over here for economic prosperity, real religious freedom. You weren't going to get that in the Spanish or the French colonies, right? You came over and you were Catholic in those. These people allowed different faiths to come here and to live better lives. They wanted to be able to move up and down. Unlike Spain, there would not be, at least for whites, I got to say that, right, to make sure, but there would not be this really rigid system that you couldn't move up or down. From the beginning, America offered that chance for you to rise up, or maybe if you or I up there, to move back down. The British, y'all, or the English are not going to focus on as much mining. They tried. There wasn't a whole lot of gold or silver or jewels. But what there was a lot of was agriculture. There was good soil. They could plant crops. They could fish and do that. And, of course, they took land from the Indians, and for the most part, made it theirs, pushed the Indians away. And remember, they did not live with the Indians. Pocahontas, of course, John Rolfe being an important exception. Now, I'm going to end with this particular slide here and teach you guys some math, okay? Now, a lot of time you hear students say England, and they talk about it like the whole thing is called England. But in fact, y'all, England is just the largest kingdom in what we today call the United Kingdom. Green here shows England, right? It's the heart of the island. Now, this island is called Britain or Great Britain. If you want to be safe, you call a person from this island British. Because if they're Scottish and you call them English, well, you might get beat up, okay? Or if they're Welsh, you might get beat up. So call them British. That's the best term. Now, these were kind of separate kingdoms until around 1800 when they were united. So we're going to do some math here. First thing, you take England, and to England, you see its flag right here. You only see that normally in soccer, right? When you see the English soccer teams playing. To England, you add Wales, all right? I used to live in Wales, y'all, when I was a real little kid. Came pretty close to being born there, which would have been pretty awesome to have dual citizenship. Look at that cool symbol. If you look at my classroom over there, you see it by the American flag. That's the Welsh red dragon, one of the oldest national symbols in the world.
Good evening. High pressure is going to be with us for the next couple of days, so the settled
now Welsh is a whole different language. You're going to see this weatherman talking about the weather in Wales.
Sunshine. Now today we had a big contrast
and
in temperature.
Check out the name of this Welsh town here, y'all.
The parts of eastern England with cloudy skies, but in the sunshine in northwest Wales at RAF Mona, just up the road from Llanfair the Pwllgwyngyll, Sgrogeric and Drobwll, Llantysilio Gogogoch, the temperature got to 20.
That's the name of a town. That's Welsh, y'all. It's crazy.
Now through this evening and overnight, there were...
All right. Now to Wales, you add Scotland, and look at the flag of Scotland, y'all. It's blue with a cross of St. Andrew to go with the cross of St. James, I think. Okay. And what does that give us?
All things Scottish. Our slogan is, if it's no Scottish, it's crap.
If it's not Scottish, it's crap. Now, this equals Great Britain or Britain to differentiate it from Little Brittany across the way in France, eh? In 1800, they're going to add Ireland to this, and it's going to become known as the United Kingdom or the UK or Great Britain or Britain. The official name, though, is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's the name of it today. Now, I showed you all those flags. They looked kind of familiar. There's the cross of England there, okay? And there's the Scottish cross of St. Andrew. Huh. What would happen if we were to say, merge those? Oh my gosh, you get Mr. D's tie. And that is indeed where the so-called English, the flag comes from of the United Kingdom. It incorporates Scotland, it incorporates England, and I guess this is as good as the Welsh get, y'all. But, you know, being a person of part Irish background, why didn't they at least give us some green on this, huh? That's my question. All right, I'm going to stop there, y'all, and I'll talk to y'all tomorrow. All right, bye-bye.